Thank you all for tuning in today. We are very excited to have a good friend of Align, Alexander Sandy Cohen, CPA, as today's webinar speaker. We were able to put this together somewhat quickly. So we hope that you all take these learnings and share them out with your respective networks. Sandy sits on the board of directors for Align and has been a super valuable resource for us navigating through these uncertain times, especially around topics relating to federal government assistance. We found Sandy's advice to be the most accurate that we've been able to find, and he's been very busy advising companies of all different sorts and sizes in terms of getting approved for loan assistance as quickly as possible. So we're very excited to have him here sharing the most up-to-date information available with you today. Obviously, as things change, we'll try to update these materials accordingly, and Sandy is also available as a continuing resource for people who may have additional questions after the webinar. So with that, I'll turn it over to Sandy. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Great, thanks, Henry, I appreciate it. And so I don't forget to say, so Align's been putting out a lot of useful content on how best practices for working remotely, how to work in this kind of environment we're in now. And the Align tools are the most important part, which is the Huddle tool, is actually being made available now to all businesses to use during this time. Is that still correct, Henry?
Yes.
Okay. So we should send out some information to this list on that too, on the free Huddle tool, because there's a lot of people on here who I think probably are not in the Align network normally. So I want them to be able to learn about how to use those tools right now. So my screen, okay, if there's any problem hearing me or seeing anything during this, please put in a Q&A or a chat and we'll fix it. Also, I'd like this to be as interactive as possible. I don't have any hard stop time, so we'll go as long as there's questions that people would like to have answered that I can help with. If you have questions along the way, put them in the Q&A box. I may stop and answer them at that point. I may come back to them if I know that they're going to come up with the content later. If I don't answer your question because I don't have the answer, then I will try to follow up with you. And I think we have your email if you're in here, so we know how to reach you. So just let us know your questions as we go. You don't need to wait till the end, and we'll get started. So quick introduction for myself. I am not a tax CPA. Primarily what I spend time doing is forensic accounting, expert witness work, litigation support, and a lot of business consulting with businesses of all kinds on problems and tough situations that they're dealing with. Sometimes it's buying and selling companies, sometimes it's distressed companies, sometimes it's transitions and key personnel. And I've experienced different industries as well as nonprofits. And so I've found myself, I think, well situated to kind of follow what's going on right now and piece together the relevant information for the bulk of businesses. There's always specific situations that are going to be different. And this is not intended to be an answer to anybody's specific situation or question. This is supposed to be general information. And the best person to get advice from, if you're not confident in information, is an attorney or a CPA who works for you, who knows your business best, who you're engaged with. So please take this to be general information. I hope it's helpful, but it is by no means comprehensive or the answer to everybody's specific situation. And there is the disclaimer to talk about that. I'll leave that for a minute so that you can not read it. One thing that's on there I want to point out is that today's April 8th. If you're watching this on April 9th, it may not be accurate anymore. Things are moving very quickly. If we're getting a lot of downloads of this, if people want information to stay updated, I'll update the slides and we'll keep them updated. If they're not there anymore, it's probably because things have changed too much and perhaps we'll do a follow-up webinar. Again, what you'll see on the slide now, I'll try to answer your questions as they come in. If I don't answer a question, I will attempt to follow up with you. Everybody can feel free to email me as well. My email address is here. I think it's on the webinar registration page and it's on Align's website. And it's sandy@alexandercohen.org. I'm going to turn off my video now so I don't forget that it's on, and I will turn it on again when we do some Q&A. And I'm going to look from there. Henry, can you see and hear okay?
Yep, all good.
Okay, great. So let's get started. All right, so today we're going to talk mainly about the two major SBA loan programs that have been put in place or modified to address the COVID crisis. That's the EIDL program and the PPP program. EIDL stands for Economic Injury Disaster Loan. PPP stands for Paycheck Protection Program. EIDL is not new, PPP is, but they've both been changed and mostly for the better to address the current situation that's going on, and obviously have a lot more funding added to them. So I'm going to assume that we're 10, 12 days out from some of this legislation, that most of the people on this call have been following to some degree or another what's going on, have some general familiarity. So what I want to do is highlight issues and interpretations and outlook that I have found that have either been misunderstood, misinterpreted, there's conflicting information out there, or guidance that has been published just in the past few days that you may not have seen yet, even if you've been following along with this. So it's not intended to be comprehensive, although we will kind of touch the basic outlines. It's really supposed to be an update that's useful today, even if you were watching a webinar last week. One thing, the bottom of the slide that I want to get out of the way quickly, because I think this maybe is one of the most confusing things for people, and it leads into other confusion. On both the EIDL and the PPP application processes, you will be asked what kind of business you are. This question is from a tax perspective. So to be clear, you can be an LLC and be a sole proprietor, even though those may both be boxes you can check off. You can be an S Corp and you can be an LLC. Those are separate boxes. The question is from the perspective of the tax return that you file. So if you have specific questions on that, ask the person who files your taxes, but don't get hung up on this. Answer the question based on what it says on your tax return, not its legal form of your business. And that really relates to self-employment also, which is we're going to discuss at the end so that we have plenty of time for that. All right, this is a table that goes through some of the differences between EIDL and PPP and ends of how do you apply? The EIDL is on the SBA website now. It's a streamlined application that's been available since about March 30th. If you applied before March 30th, you applied on a legacy application and you need to go back and apply again to be careful. I don't know what they're doing with the older applications, but I would suggest you go back and apply on the new application. We've got a link to that in any number of places on the registration, in this deck, and on the website. The PPP program is administered through banks, credit unions, and traditional lending institutions. The SBA guarantees and funds the loans in a sense, but the bank is the one who is going to take your application and send you the money. Maximum loan amount. The EIDL maximum loan amount is $2 million, although that may not be available. I've heard different things this week about reduced loan ceilings, and we'll talk about the formula for the loan to begin with, but statutorily it's $2 million. PPP is $10 million. To go back for 1 second on PPP and how do you apply, banks and credit unions are at various levels of organization with this. It went live last Friday. I think nobody really put in an application on Friday except for maybe some very, very select businesses. Banks, some of them have portals, some of them are handing it by email, some of them are doing it very paper-based. Many banks are limiting their applications they will take to businesses that they have existing relationships with. So start with the bank that you have a relationship with. And I'm not going to endorse or name any specific banks. If you have questions and you want to follow with me directly, I can try to give you the best information I have. There shouldn't be any difference depending on what bank you go to. It should be whatever bank you can get into and will prioritize you. It shouldn't change the loan. The rules are the rules. There's no fees, and that's kind of the long and short of that. Excuse me. So use of proceeds. EIDL is very broad. It is really for anything because it includes working capital. PPP is very narrow. It's for payroll, it's for interest on loans and rent on leases you had before the COVID crisis, and it's for utilities. I skipped a line, so I'm going to go back up. But the use of proceeds relates directly to the formula for the loan amount. So the EIDL formula is 50% of your annual gross profit. The measurement period they're asking you to report is the 12 months ending on January 31st, 2020. So that means you're reporting February 1st, 2019 to January 31st, 2020. The idea of gross margin is basically revenue less cost of goods sold. And we'll talk more about why that's the formula in a minute, but it's cost of goods sold and revenue as reported on your tax return. And we'll talk about that more in a minute. The PPP program, the loan amount is going to be equal to 10 weeks of gross payroll, and that can include certain benefits and expenses that are not paid directly to employees, and it's limited to $100,000 per employee, with some amounts that can go over 100,000. We'll talk about that in a slide, couple slides on. Forgiveness. This is a hot topic. Potentially on the EIDL, there's up to $10,000 of forgiveness. It relates to an advance program that nobody that I know has actually gotten yet, but potentially there's $10,000 of forgiveness. And that forgiveness supposedly is available even if you do not accept the loan. So the idea is you can apply for the loan, get the advance. When they actually offer you your full loan, you can say, I don't want that, and you can still keep the $10,000 or whatever advance you got up to $10,000. That's the way it's supposed to work. PPP, the forgiveness is a little bit more complicated, but the idea is that most or all of your loans should be forgiven if you maintain your payroll or rehire people if you fired them already or furloughed them already. You don't reduce your headcount and you don't reduce your payroll more than 75%. The tests are more complicated than that, but the idea is that it is all or largely forgiven if you maintain your payroll. I haven't figured out the exact guidance for this, but clearly if you're in the movie theater business, for instance, there's nothing for those people to do right now. So you need to pay them, and they don't need to be working as far as I can understand. Logically, it doesn't make any sense to me how the expectation could be otherwise. So I just want to throw that out. The loan term, EIDL up to 30 years, it is underwritten, so they might decide that your repayment or your need should be 20 years or 15 years. PPP is 2 years, period. The reason I write 18 months with a question mark is because payments are deferred on the PPP loan for the first 6 months. I do not know whether that means that you'll have 2 years termed out after 6 months, or it'll really be 18 months. I'm not sure the answer to that. If anybody has that answer, feel free to put it in the chat box on any of the free information that I have, please. The interest rates you can see there. Personal guarantees. This is a change, and there's been confusion about this. The EIDL program, there's no personal guarantee required up to $200,000. PPP, no personal guarantee at all. And we'll talk about this in a little bit more detail on a future slide. Payment deferral, we've already talked about. Real quick, if you had an SBA loan in place before COVID, there are also payment relief things going on where you can defer payments. So check with your SBA lender about that if you have an existing SBA loan. Is this credit based? Is it repayment based? EIDL, the answer is kind of. They are going to run a credit check. There may be some repayment analysis. There may be some give and take on the loan amount based on repayment analysis and profitability and things like that. It is an underwritten loan, as I understand it. On PPP, it's not clear to me that it's credit-based. I haven't seen anything that says it isn't, but I also don't think it is. So that's a little bit unclear. If anybody has any better information on that, feel free to share it. Application deadlines you can see at the bottom. I want to clarify that for PPP, the application deadline doesn't mean that that's the end of the forgiveness period, the measurement period for your payroll. It means it's the latest you could start that period, would be June 30th, as I understand it. Next slide. Here's a link to that application for EIDL that's up now. I don't know when you'll get the money, but you should go ahead and do it. If you applied on the long form, reapply at this link. $10,000 advances, I'm calling them mythical here. We've talked about that. No one knows where they're coming, when they're coming, how they're coming, if they're coming. I kind of looked at Reddit and some other things this morning. It seemed like some people maybe were getting some emails to go log in and confirm some information. If anybody has any updates on that, please share it. But if it comes, it seems like that'll be forgiven up to $10,000. Let's talk a little bit more about the EIDL income to report. Again, the language is pulled from a tax return jargon. So use your tax return revenue or net sales, depending on the kind of form you file, and use the cost of goods sold on your tax return. Those are the questions they're asking, use those. The intent in deducting the cost of goods sold, as I see it, is to come up with your ongoing expenses. So if there's expenses you're not going to have during your shutdown or interruption, your loan should not need to cover those expenses. So that's the idea, is they're trying to give you 6 months of ongoing expenses. I put an underline under this last one because it's an important point. I don't want anybody to think that they have to be making money to have this loan. You have to have gross margin. You can't be losing money on everything you sell before you pay your expenses, but you do not have to have positive net income to have gross margin, and therefore you don't have to have positive net income to get an EIDL loan, as I see it. I also think that businesses that are primarily landlords appear to be eligible for the EIDL. I don't think that's the case with PPP. It does seem to be the case for EIDL. I'll pause for a second. Henry, I haven't seen any questions come in. Have you had any chats or questions?
No questions yet, but again, everyone feel free to send them in as they come up using the Q&A at the bottom.
Great. Thanks, guys. All right, next slide. How do these loans interact with each other? There's been a lot of confusion about this. A lot of it was cleared up a couple days ago, but if you haven't seen that guidance, the answer is you can get both loans, you can keep both loans, you can get forgiveness up to the parameters that are allowed on both loans, but what you can't do is use them for the same purpose. So your EIDL loan can be used for paying bills, it can be used for paying notes, it can be used for paying really anything that relates to your business that you would have been able to pay if not for the disaster. Your PPP is really for payroll, and then also you can use it for utilities, interest, and rent, but you should really try to use it for payroll to maximize your forgiveness. I see a couple questions coming on. I'll pause for a second. I'll answer these questions in a second. Keep them coming. There's a quote here that I think makes this really clear. Just don't use them for the same purpose. The application form, as I last saw it for the PPP, asks you to add your EIDL loan amount. It doesn't explain that it's only for payroll purposes, but that is how it reads to me. And I think you need to clarify with the bank that first of all, nobody has an EIDL loan right now that I know. I'd love to hear from you if you have one. But if you did have one theoretically today and you went and did a PPP application tomorrow, I don't think you need to put in your EIDL loan in that box other than the forgiveness amount that they ask for, unless you're going to use both for payroll, in which case you do need to add it in. So in many ways is a better loan because it has a longer amortization, and that's the reason that you might want to have both of them. You don't want to pay it all back in 18 months or 2 years. Let me stop and look at the questions. Okay, question from my friend Jonathan. If you misunderstood COGS for EIDL, thoughts on refiling versus waiting for someone to contact you? My gut is wait for someone to contact you. I don't think you can go wrong either way. Next question, do 2019 taxes need to be filed to qualify for EIDL? I do not think that they do. I think that 2019 taxes are not due yet, and they were extended even for March 15th deadline, so I think the answer is no. But let me say that if you want to use 2019 data, you're going to have documentation that supports 2019's profit and loss. You're not going to be able to use a tax return if you don't have one. If you are self-employed without employees, how is the PPP calculated? And in turn, how is forgiveness calculated in that situation? We'll get to that in a little while. Okay, I think that's all the questions that are up right now. Okay, I'll pause for a second if anybody has anything else. All right, we'll keep moving. Joel, we're going to answer your question a little bit later on. Okay, faith-based organizations. On April 3rd, some guidance came out that waived limitations that were in the law that required proceeds to be used for things that were available to the general public and in secular settings. This was worrying a lot of faith-based organizations that didn't have significant public programs. The guidance looks good for those organizations. Another issue that I have not seen addressed, so I'm going to give you my take on it. If you are a faith-based organization like a synagogue or a church or a mosque, you may not file a tax return, a Form 990. You're not required to do so. You might do it, but you might not. So where do you get your cost of goods sold from? That's not a concept that's really used for churches and synagogues and mosques. So I've got an example here of what you might consider to be cost of goods sold in the spirit of what they're asking for here, which is expenses that you will avoid during the shutdown. So my example is if you cater meals after your services and you're not holding those services, a cost of holding that service is the meal. So I would think about that to be in the spirit of cost of goods sold, and you should make a good faith effort along those lines to estimate your cost of goods sold. Guarantees, a little bit more detail here from the prior slide, waived up to $200,000. If your loan is over $200,000, owners who have 20% or more will have to guarantee. I think you could also choose to keep the loan at a lower amount if that's your preference. And I want to make clear that even if there's no guarantees, this is not a non-recourse loan with respect to the business. The business is on the hook, its assets are on the hook. I believe that if you have any real estate and your loan goes over $500,000, they'll want a mortgage on that real estate. I don't know whether you'll have an issue if you already have a first mortgage on it, if they'll take a second. I'm not sure about that. If anybody knows, please chime in. All right, moving on to PPP. I haven't seen any other questions come in, so I'm going to keep going. Here's a question. Yesterday, the SBA published changes to EIDL, including of a grant application was applied for payroll. There's now a limit of 1,000 per employee. I have seen that, and I've seen that they changed the language again even since then. I don't know anybody who knows how they're going to calculate the grants that has proven that out with actual grants. So I can't really give you any better information about that. I see a follow-up question here. Your EIDL application, I don't think you specify the use of funds. So it's not about, that's a good question actually. You're not specifying the use of funds on EIDL, you're just using them. So you just need to be internally careful that you're using them for other purposes and not for the same purposes as the PPP, so that if you come and get asked questions about this, you'll have documentation that you segregated the use of proceeds. So good question there. I'm glad that you got me to clarify this is not an application question as far as the EIDL. And on the PPP, you do talk about your use of proceeds, but it's basically just for payroll. So there's not a lot of other uses it could be. I see some other questions from the same person about this. I hope I've addressed your questions. I don't think EIDL is specific to payroll or capital in the application, so I wouldn't worry about that, to my knowledge. All right, so we're going to move on to PPP. PPP is all about payroll, and payroll is defined in several places in this PPP law and rules about it, and different Q&As and FAQs that Treasury and SBA have issued. What is payroll? Payroll is equally measured on calendar year 2019. It includes a couple of things. It includes gross W-2 wages up to $100,000 per employee. That would be salary, hourly wages, commissions, tips, which is good because tips aren't usually your employer's expense. It includes the employer's share of expenses for things like healthcare, retirement, and other benefits. This is on top of the wage cap of $100,000. So if you have an employee that you pay $150,000 gross, and you have another $20,000 of health insurance premiums you pay for that employee in your group plan, you will be able to include him or her at $100,000 plus $20,000. That includes retirement and other benefits. A question, not so much a question, but a thing that I've noticed, and I haven't found anybody who has kind of confirmed or disputed this take. There's some documents, some FAQs, and some guidelines from the SBA and Treasury that list vacation, personal leave, sick leave as a separate category from salary and wages. A lot of businesses don't consider those to be separate things. You pay somebody $120,000 a year and they get 2 weeks of vacation. You have $120,000 a year of expense, period. Based on the way this is listed, I'm wondering if you could break out the cost of their 2 weeks of vacation as a separate category, take it out of their salary, move it over to benefits, and then you could have it on top of the cap for that employee. I don't know the answer for sure, but one thing I know is you need to make sure you don't double count it. So if you move it to benefits, move it out of salaries and wages. Something that came up just yesterday is, what about a parsonage allowance? That's something that exists for faith-based organizations that allows pastoral employees to have a housing allowance without being taxed on it. Is that part of compensation? That's a little bit of an open question. I think that someone on this call dealt with that with a bank yesterday, and they moved it to benefits, and they're waiting to see what they say about that. But again, make sure you don't double count. What about payroll taxes and income tax withholdings? There was some guidance early on that made it seem like you were using net payroll and not gross payroll. That has been clarified, and that is not correct. The only thing that you're not including is your employer's share of federal payroll tax expense. You can include the employer's state payroll tax expense. You can't include the federal part. This thing about income tax withholdings is not there's nothing that's been clarified. They're really concerned. Also, kind of a caveat here, some businesses on their P&L lump payroll taxes together with payroll expense. If you're doing that, then there's a part of that line you need to back out for the federal payroll tax expense. So make sure you're not including that. How do you report the number of employees? This is a little bit tricky, and I think the form is problematic. I think that there's two different things that they're getting at here. With respect to size standards and certifying that you don't have 500 employees or whatever the standard is for your business NAICS code, you should be counting any employee, whether they work half-time, quarter-time, full-time, doesn't matter. With respect to your full-time equivalent employees for the purpose of payroll and forgiveness and maintaining your payroll, I believe what you're supposed to do is report them on a full-time equivalent basis, which means that multiple employees can add up to one employee. And the definition of full-time, as I understand it, is 30 hours a week minimum. So 2 employees working 15 hours under that basis is 1 full-time equivalent employee. So be careful with the question and try to answer it in response to what the question is being used for. Again, I want to highlight here, you do not have to have positive net income to get the PPP loan, and based on anything that I am aware of. See a couple questions come in. Most webinars I have been on say parsonage is included as some type of compensation. So I would love to discuss that further with the person who put that question in. I know of one institution in New Orleans who dealt with that yesterday, and I can put together the people that dealt with that. The bank didn't like it because it wasn't on the W-3. It's certainly compensation. The question is it compensation like a retirement benefit, or is it compensation like salary and wages? So you got to get the bank to agree to take it, and that was the issue that brought it up yesterday. All right, so what about self-employment income? This is the big question that I know a lot of people have. We got this question from 6 or 7 people ahead of the webinar on the registration. I'm going to try to make it as clear as I can. My position is not one that is totally published, but I don't think it's contradicted by anything either, and this is the way it seems to me. So what about self-employment income? What about sole proprietors? What if I have no employees? So first of all, a sole proprietor is either self-employed or an independent contractor or a partner in a partnership. And there's a lot of confusion about this. So gig worker, independent contractor, self-employed, these are all the same thing, and they all pretty much mean sole proprietor. If you get income that you don't pay payroll taxes on, that you don't get a W-2 for, and you have net income from that kind of activity, you're going to pay self-employment taxes. And in this quote that I have in italics, this is from Treasury, and it says what counts as payroll costs, and it includes net earnings from self-employment of a sole proprietor or independent contractor. So that would mean a partner in a partnership who gets a K-1 that he pays self-employment tax on, an Uber driver who's an independent contractor who gets a 1099 that he pays self-employment tax on, a restaurant owner who has employees but still files as a sole proprietor on Schedule C, and he has net earnings at the bottom of that Schedule C. So let's take this in 2 different situations, other employees or not other employees. So let's use the Uber driver who has a Schedule C or a Schedule C Easy. He gets a 1099 from Uber. He has some expenses he deducts from that, and he has net earnings from self-employment on his Schedule C. That should be flowing through to his Schedule SE on his personal tax return on line 2. In my mind, with this definition from Treasury, that is his or her annual payroll from that activity under this definition. I think that he could divide it by 12, multiply it by 2.5, and put it on his PPP application. That's how it seems to me. What about the restaurant owner who files a Schedule C who also has employees that he issues W-2 for? You don't have to have an incorporated business to issue W-2s. That person should do his PPP application, including all the W-2 income he pays out to other people. And he should also take the residual net earnings from self-employment and divide that by 12, and that should be his part of the PPP loan per month, in my opinion. Not totally clear, but this is how it seems to me. So use it at your own discretion and with advice from professionals that advise you for a living. If there's questions about that, bring them in now. There's another thing going on that that has a infamous up to independent contractors and self-employed individuals. I don't know what that means because those people already fall into the definition here and what's open now. It may mean that they're going to give banks more guidance on how to deal with them. It might mean that they're going to have guidance for people that have 1099 income and show a net loss where they'll still be able to claim some PPP amount even though they have a net loss from self-employment. So I don't know what's going to happen with that on the 10th, but this is how it looks to me today. I see another question. I too have participated in several webinars. I'm a sole proprietor filing on Schedule C. However, my income is W-2 and the 1099. Yesterday I was informed that I should apply now, especially as I earn W-2. If you're getting a W-2, this is a good question because I didn't hit my last bullet point. If you're getting a W-2 from a business that you don't own, that business can apply for a PPP loan, and if they get it and they want to get it forgiven, they'll have to pay you. If you get a W-2 from a business that you own, you are not self-employed by that business. You are an employee of that business, even though you own it, and that business needs to make its own that business needs to make its own application for the PPP, and it can include you along with the other employees at the W-2 that it issues you. I hope that's clear. If you're including W-2 on your Schedule C, I don't know why you're doing that, so that's not clear to me. That may take some one-off advice. Let's see. If you are a self-employed partner, for what can you use the PPP loan proceeds? That's a great question. I don't know what else you can use it for other than to live on. I mean, it's what you use it for now. You continue to use it. It's not totally a satisfactory idea, Max. I get what you're saying. I think the question is really, how do you prove that you paid yourself? It maybe is the question. I'd love to talk to you about that separately because I don't know how other professional services groups are doing this when they get self-employment and they get guaranteed payments, for instance. There's a lot of angles to that. But the question of what can you use the loan proceeds for, I think it's the same thing. I think it's payroll. I don't know how you prove it as payroll. That's a little bit gray to me. Let's see what other questions. Our bank will not accept sole proprietor self-employed until Friday. I understand you don't agree. Yeah, I mean, based on what's right here, I don't agree. If they're not accepting Schedule Cs at all, that may be their policy right now, and you might have to wait till the 10th. I don't know. I provide a service and I'm paid from multiple payroll companies to use equipment during the service season. Maybe I should use my W-2 income as my payroll. Let me read this again. I provide a service and am paid from multiple payroll companies and use equipment during this service. It seems that maybe I should use my W-2 income as my payroll and my equipment as the goods sold. For the person who's asking this question, if you are getting W-2 income and you're not getting paid, you should be filing for unemployment. That's all I can tell you about that. If you have expenses in performing your work that you get paid as a W-2 person on, those are basically itemized deductions, maybe like people that have to have uniforms or have unreimbursed travel expenses. That's not a business if you're getting paid for it by W-2. If you're getting paid on a 1099, the question is what I said before. Then you should have a Schedule C where you pay taxes on those 1099s after deducting expenses. Let's see what my next slide is. This is the last slide. It's not so exciting, but I had a question about what about farmers? It appears that farmers are eligible for PPP. I don't think they're eligible for EIDL. I've got a link here at the bottom for the USDA where you can talk about where you can read about different coronavirus resources. I think there may also be some debt relief programs for USDA loans and other types of loans out there. I'm sure there's a lot of lobbying going on to help farmers right now. I'm going to wait a minute to see if other questions come in. I want to also say that one thing that has really struck me during all this is as much or maybe even more than healthcare workers, people that are in the food distribution supply chain, whether that's people on farms, people in stores, people in drugstores, people in grocery stores, people driving trucks, these people are holding society together right now. If we didn't have food in stores, things would be falling apart at the seams. They would have fallen apart already. So let's all be very grateful to those people and recognize them. They don't have to show up for work, and they're showing up for work and they're putting health, and I'm really grateful to them. So I wanted to share that with everybody because it's been on my mind. Any other questions? Let's hear from some more people. Anything coming on the chat box that I didn't see, Henry?
No, I think you've hit them all as they've come in.
Okay. I don't. Is anybody else typing? Speak now or forever hold your peace.
We can give a couple minutes more for people to type in if they have anything. Just wanted to thank you, Sandy, obviously, for taking the time. Can you go to the next slide real quick, just so people have your...
One?
I thought there was
I think
one.
I took it out.
Okay, no worries. If we go back just with your email.
My email is right there.
Yeah. So any questions, please feel free to follow up to Sandy there. I'm really thankful for the time and the information. Obviously, a lot of confusion, a lot of, navigating anything like this that's been thrown together so quickly is difficult, and information is changing so quickly. But we thank you, Sandy, for staying on top of everything and helping our network during this time. Very much appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. I appreciate the opportunity. If people have questions, we'll continue to answer them. If I think they're relevant to the group, I'll push them out to the email list of the group. We'll do this again if people have a desire to do it. My email is there. Email me anytime. A lot of you know how to get me otherwise, and I thank everybody for their time. Thanks, Henry, for hosting this.
Yep, no worries. And we will send out some sort of follow-up information as well as an invite to our next webinar, which is Tuesday the 21st with Coach Bill Gallagher on 5 moves to make to go from struggling to thriving during the crisis. So we'll send out some follow-up information about that, as well as Sandy's contact information, key information from the webinar. And again, we'll try to continue to keep everything relevant and up to date as time goes along. But thank you all to attending.
And send them to sign up for the huddle too, please.
Yes. We will also send out a link to sign up to the free Align huddle tools that are available throughout this disruption.
And it's really free. It's not like a hook for like a week. We're just making it free.
Nope. It's at this point it is yes, indefinitely available.
Great.
Yeah. So thanks everyone for tuning in, and hope you all stay safe during this time. Continue to find some peace of mind wherever possible.
Yeah. Well said. Thanks.
Thank you all.